Well, we'll be in the book of Acts, chapter 15. And I'll tell you this, when I left yesterday and I was just like, when we had all the decorations up, I was just like, I don't know the last time that the church had no pulpit furniture ever on stage, and there was a Sunday sermon with no furniture. So it will be an absolute shock to people when they walk in, because we have traditions. Like when I went to my grandparents' church, they sat in the same pew and they never moved, right? And so when somebody came and sat in their pew, like maybe a guest or somebody who'd never been there before, they're just like, where do we sit? What do we do? Because traditions are just ingrained in us, right? We just get stuck on a tradition. And so when I left yesterday, I was just like, hopefully we won't offend people, because we're breaking a tradition. And then when I started studying the scriptures, what I saw was the same exact concept, was this idea of tradition. And that's what we're going to look at this morning in Acts chapter 15. Because what we saw last week, remember when I was telling you that Paul and Barnabas are going around sharing the good news, and people didn't like it. Some people got very upset, even though God was doing a great work among the people. And I told you there was going to be a council, and they were going to have to go before people because they were breaking traditions. And so let me read it for you. It's Acts chapter 15, beginning in verse number 1. But some men came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. And after Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and debate with them, Paul and Barnabas and some of the others were appointed to go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and the elders about this question. So being sent on their way by the church, they passed through both Phoenicia and Samaria, describing in detail the conversion of the Gentiles, and brought great joy to all the brothers. When they came to Jerusalem, they were welcomed by the church and the apostles and the elders, and they declared all that God had done with them. But some believers who belonged to the party of Pharisees rose up and said, it is necessary to circumcise them and to order them to keep the law of Moses. Now, in the next couple of weeks, actually probably about 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at this entire council and what's happening. And it's 22 verses, and the reason why we're stopping right here is because there's a major problem presented. There is an absolute problem that the disciples are facing in the beginning of the church movement, is that they're actually having to say, okay, this has been the tradition of the Jews for thousands of years. But Jesus has come, and Jesus has opened the way up, and Jesus has changed how we do things. And this is the first moment where they have to step in there and they go, we're not going to follow the traditions. It made me think about just traditions in general. And one of the stories I read was about a very poor holy man in China. Now, what he would do is they had their times of meditation and prayer, and this man was a devout holy man. And what he would do, I don't exactly know why he would do this, but he would get butter, and he'd put butter on the windowsill as his offering to God. And the reason he did that was to show his devotion, because food was scarce. And I don't know why, he thought that just putting butter on it would be an offering to God. But anyways, this is what he thought. Now, if any of you have a cat, what will happen if you left food out? That cat will go and eat it, right? Well, this holy man had a cat, and the cat would go up and eat his butter. And he was like, that's my devotion to God, stop eating my butter. And so the cat kept doing that, and so what he did was he started to tie the cat up to his bedpost. And so every morning he would go and pray, he would have his butter on the windowsill and have his cat tied up. And so this man would do that for a long time, and then people came around this man, they said, he is so holy, so devout. We want to be followers of him. We want to do exactly what he does. And so they did. And for hundreds of years after he left this earth, after he passed away, many, many people would pray and have butter on the windowsill. And they would go a step further. They would all go and buy cats to tie up to the bedpost. Now, sometimes traditions like that, you go, okay, that holy man, he would pray to God and he would have butter on the windowsill. I don't know why he had a cat tied up to the bed, but it must be something holy. So we need to go buy a cat and tie it up to the bed too, so we can be just as holy as he is. Right? None of them knew that the reason why he would tie up the cat to the bedpost was because the cat kept eating the butter. They thought that that was his sacrifice to God, that you had to buy the butter and then you had to tie up a cat to the bedpost. Sometimes we get that way too. Sometimes we look at traditions in our lives and we go, well, my mama always did it this way, my daddy always did it this way, my mama was a Republican, my daddy was a Republican, or my mama was a Democrat, my daddy was a Democrat, so I am. I don't care what any party says, that's what my mama was, so that's what I am. Right? Sometimes we just get stuck in our own lives and we go, this is the way tradition is, and so I must follow tradition. And this is exactly what the Jewish folk are doing in this midst of new believers. That Jesus has come and died on the cross. Jesus is the Messiah that they've been looking for thousands of years. God is going to save all his people. And then, in the midst of all of that, the Jews go, but wait a minute, I know there's a new reality. I know there's something new going on, but we have to keep our traditions. We have to do things like we've always done them. And the disciples, Paul and Barnabas especially, are going, no, traditions don't save you. And when we leave this morning, I hope you can take that with you, is that a tradition does not save you. And so often we go, yeah, we know that. But when it comes to planning our real lives and our own lives, we go, you know what? This is how my parents had their marriage. This is how my parents raised me. And so we take that into our own marriages and our own childhood and we go, you know what? This is how my parents did it. So I'm going to do it the exact way they did it. Or we look at our own children as they raise their own children and we go, you're not raising them the way I would have done it. Because I did it better. Look at y'all. Y'all turned out great, right? So that means I was a great parent. So y'all should do it the exact way I did it. Sometimes we think that if we will follow the tradition, if we will just do exactly what our parents did, or do exactly what we've been told we're supposed to do, that that's going to make things better. That's going to save us. And it won't. But here's the reality. We can say we don't have traditions, but we all have traditions. Read it in verse 1. It says, but some men came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. There's actually a story back in Genesis. You should read Genesis. There's some cool stories in it. That when Abraham comes to faith in God, and God calls him to go get his people and lead them out. And anyways, he's going to lead them out, and he doesn't have his children circumcised. And so Moses gets very, very sick, and then his wife has to go and circumcise the child because God was going to kill him because he wasn't circumcised. It was a sign for the Jews a long, long time ago that you marked yourself as the community of Jewish people, as people of God, by having circumcision. And when this occurred, you really and truly showed, I am fully bought in to God. I am fully His. I am in this community. And so what these Jewish folk are saying is that this is what is even in the Bible. That God had called His people, that if you really were going to identify, I am a follower of Yahweh, that you had circumcision. It's written in our books. It's written in the law, the Torah. We are supposed to be circumcised, or we're not truly marking ourselves as followers of God. We all have traditions. That is the tradition that they grew up with. And so, for thousands of years, that's the way it's been. And for all of their lives that they've grown up with, that is the way it's been. When Gentiles would come to the faith, Gentiles would say, I want to be a follower of Yahweh. They'd say, okay, then you have to be circumcised. And that was a true indicator right there if they really wanted to be a follower of God or not. Because what a lot of times the Gentiles do would be like, I want to follow your God. I don't want to get circumcised, though. And so there would be a second class of follower of God. They'd be like, they'd sit on the outside. They knew that they could never be full converts because they weren't going to take that extra step. And so this group is coming in and saying, this is the way we've always done it. If Gentiles wanted to become followers of God, then they had to be circumcised. And if they wouldn't be circumcised, then they would never be full converts or full followers of God or full people of God. This is the way we've always done it. It's according to Moses. This is the way we've always done it. Now, what I found interesting is that Paul and Barnabas, they debated with them. There was an argument amongst them. But look how Paul and Barnabas resolve a conflict. I want you to see it. I didn't see it until I was studying it. And after Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and debate with them. Is that the best way to say what husbands and wives or mothers have with their children or fathers have with their children? No great dissension, right? No small dissension. It's usually a very big conflict whenever two opposing sides come and say, I want to do it this way, and the parent goes, no, right? Or a spouse says, I want to go do this, and I'm going to go do this, and the other spouse goes, no way, right? And there's just this small dissension, right? As my friend in seminary would say, he said, I've never had an argument with my wife, ever. I was like, really? He said, yeah. He said, I've had intense moments of fellowship many, many times, right? So this is what's happening right here, is that they're having a very intense moment of fellowship. They completely disagree with each other. Completely and utterly disagree. And after Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and debate with them, Paul and Barnabas and some of the others were appointed to go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and the elders about this question. So being sent on their way by the church, they passed through both Phoenicia and Samaria, describing in detail the conversion of the Gentiles, and brought great joy to all the brothers. When they came to Jerusalem, they were welcomed by the church and the apostles and the elders, and they declared all that God had done with them. So you notice how what they are supposed to do is they go to their leaders. They go, you know what? This is what we've seen. Does it say that they went and badmouthed the Jews behind their back? Does it say that they went and said, you know what, those people over there, they're saying all this junk about us, and it's all their fault? No, it says they went to their leaders, and they said, this is what God has done. They entrusted their problem. They entrusted it with their leaders. Sometimes we get so angry, sometimes we get so caught up in a disagreement or an argument that we go, you know what? Forget them. I'm going to go do it my way, right? Nobody in here has ever done that, right? Nobody in here has ever gone, you know what? Those people over there, I can't work with them. Forget them. I'm going to go do it my way, and it's going to get done right, right? Nobody in here has ever done that. But if you were to do that, if you had ever had that moment in life where you did that, just think with me. Does it ever go well? Does it go better? Do you create friendships? Do you have that restored fellowship with those people when you do that? No. It gets a lot worse because you didn't trust that there could be agreement, that there could be compromise. You didn't trust that. And what I see is just very profound is that Paul and Barnabas, these leaders, they're seeing God do amazing things. They're on the very front lines of God changing history. That is exactly what these men are doing. And then they're coming back to a group that's stuck in their own ways, their old ways. No, we can't do it that way. We've always done it that way. We've always done it this way. We can't do it any other way. And Paul and Barnabas are like, do you see what God is doing? Can you not imagine what God is going to continue to do if we just let God do what only God can do, instead of saying, no, we can't do it because of tradition? Paul and Barnabas, instead of pushing back against their own leadership and saying, we're just going to do it our own way, I don't care what anybody says. No, they go up to their leaders and they go, here is what we've seen God do. And they give it to their leadership. And I just sat there and I was just like, that is not the policy that I usually follow for myself. I usually follow that it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission, right? I learned very, very quickly at an environment that I worked in Dallas that doesn't go very well, especially when your leadership has to pay the penalty for what mistakes you make. And so my pastor always told me, he said, it is better, really and truly, to ask for permission than to ask for forgiveness. He said, I promise you. And this is exactly what Paul and Barnabas do. Although they see exactly what God is doing, and you can't imagine what they've seen. I mean, we only see highlights of what they've seen. They're seeing God do amazing things, and they're entrusting it to people who haven't seen what they see. And how often do we get into a place where we go, you know what, they don't see what I'm seeing, they don't understand. So I'm just going to push them away, I'm going to do it my way. They don't get it. They don't see what I see. They just don't get it, and we push them away. Instead, Paul and Barnabas go, they don't see it. They don't see what we've done. They don't understand, but we're just going to put it in God's hands. We're going to give it to our leadership and say, this is what we've seen. And when they do that, when they present that, they entrust it to someone else. They entrust it to God. They entrust it to their leaders. And what happens? Well, verse 5 tells us, but some believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees rose up and said, it is necessary to circumcise them and to order them to keep the law of Moses. So we all have traditions, right? We all have those traditions in our lives. When we have disagreements with those traditions, we can present those to godly leadership. We can present what disagreement we have. But the reality is, people still want you to follow their traditions. They still want you to follow their traditions. They don't care if it's something new. You know, the easiest way that you can see this, and especially when I work with young couples in Dallas, is that the very first set of fights that some of these couples would have would be during the Christmas and Thanksgiving holidays. Because one spouse would say, I've always done Thanksgiving at my grandparents and my parents, and our whole family comes together. And it's just this beautiful thing. And then the other one goes, I do that too, right? When they're dating, they're both talking about how awesome that is. And then when they get married, they have to pick which one they go to, right? And so that is hard for a lot of them. And there will be a lot of hard feelings. And I'll never forget, we would come back after Thanksgiving, after Christmas, and see these young couples that were just so in love and so happy, and you see them New Year's Day, they were not as happy, and you can see that they had some wars between each other because it was the first time that they had to break a tradition. And not only was it hard for them that they had to break their tradition with their family, depending on which one chose which, but their families made it even worse because the families would come in and say, well, why aren't you going to spend Thanksgiving with us? Well, why are you spending it with their family? Why are you not coming to our family? Do you not love us? Why are you going with them? Why don't you come with us? We've always done it this way. We've always woke up and had Christmas morning together. Why are you going to spend it with his family? Why are you going to spend it with her family? Right? And so the families make it even worse and make them feel guilty, and there would be some wars between those couples over that. And the reality is that sometimes people just want you to follow their traditions, even if the whole reality, your whole life has changed, like a marriage relationship, right? Yes, there used to be a tradition there, but now that there's this marriage, there's new traditions that are going to happen. There's this new reality, so the old traditions pass away. But sometimes people just really and truly, they just want you to keep their traditions. And as I was thinking about that, the thought occurred to me that when we focus so much on keeping traditions, relationships suffer. Relationships suffer when we try to force traditions on to people. Especially when we try to force a tradition onto someone that we love. Because a tradition doesn't save. A tradition doesn't make things right. A tradition in dating, you would say, well, when I did it this way when I dated, man, love happened and it was all great. Then you try that tradition again in marriage years later and it doesn't work. But it worked back then. Sometimes we think that if we do what we used to do in the past, it'll make things better. And that is exactly what this Jewish group is doing. They're saying, well, we follow these traditions. We follow the traditions, and if we do that, then we're going to walk with God. We're going to have a better relationship if we follow the traditions. And what Jesus came to say is that traditions never save, laws never save. And so often what we try to do in our own lives is we set up traditions and we set up laws. And we say, if I do this, if I do this, if I do this, if I do this, then my relationship will get better, my marriage will get better, my children will get better. If I just follow these set rules that I put in my life, if I just do this, if I do this, it'll get better. But a tradition, a law, a rule does not save. It does not make it better. And the reason why this group of Pharisees, these group of Jews, the reason why they're so intent, especially in verse 5 where it says, it is necessary to circumcise them and to order them to keep the law of Moses, was because if you read the Old Testament, if you read it, if you set a daily plan and say, you know what, I'm going to read the Old Testament, the number one thing you're going to see is that for centuries, for thousands of years, God's people refused, absolutely refused to follow God's law. They refused to do it. God sent Jeremiah, God sent Isaiah, and God's even said to Isaiah, so many of us remember the throne room where Isaiah goes, holy, holy is God. Well, we don't read the rest of the verse, the rest of that chapter, where God basically says to Isaiah, you're going to be my mouthpiece and nobody's going to listen to you. And Isaiah looks to God and goes, well, how long, Lord? And he goes, until they all die. No one's going to listen to a word that you say. And God's prophets, God's messengers went thousands of years, and what would happen? They tried to kill them. That's what we saw in Acts so far, right? When Stephen was preaching, when Peter was preaching, they look at the Jews and they say, the reason you don't listen to God is because you try to kill all God's prophets. Whenever God tells you to do something, you refuse to do it. And so in this passage, when we see these Jews, these Pharisees are godly people. They're not trying to make things worse. What they're trying to do is say, our history shows that we didn't keep God's law, and when we didn't keep God's law, it went bad for us. We lost our relationship with God when we didn't keep our laws that God gave us. And so that's what this group is doing. There's a reason behind the tradition. But when Jesus came, Jesus said, basically, it's not about following rules. It's about a relationship with God. And so often we miss that in our own relationships. We go, if I just do this for this person, or if I just do this, or I do this, or I do this. Sometimes we can get an unhealthy habit and say, if I buy more gifts for them, right? Or we say, if I will cook more for them, or if I will make more things for them, if I'll do this or do this, if I just will do more for this person, then they're going to love me more. And so we get these rules, these traditions, these laws in our head. And the reality is a tradition and a law will never, ever, ever save you, and they will not make things better. They do not. What it is a relationship with God. It's a relationship with the people in our lives that matter, not how well we keep the law. And that is what Paul and Barnabas have such a great dissension and a great debate among these men, is they're saying, no, the reason the laws were in place in the first place was to help us walk with God. It's about a relationship. That is why God had the laws in place, so that we wouldn't hurt ourselves, so we wouldn't wander away from God. It was always about a relationship and not trying to look perfect or be perfect. And the reason why they can say that is because Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sin. Jesus goes, in the moment of the cross, Jesus goes, I have the perfect life, and I'm giving that to you, so that when God sees you, you don't ever have to work for anything. You don't ever have to do anything. God loves you unconditionally. God doesn't love you for what you do. He loves you for who you are. And the reason why God can do that is because on the cross, Jesus exchanged his life for ours. He took all of our sin. He took all of our shame. He took all of our guilt and said, you are now righteous. You are now perfect in God's eyes. And that what 2 Corinthians tells us? He made him who knew no sin to be sin so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Jesus gave his life in exchange for ours so that we could have a perfect relationship with God. And that is what Paul and Barnabas are fighting so hard against. Is I know that you have traditions. And I know that you want to follow God. I know that you deeply want to do what is right. But it's not about following a tradition. It's not about following rules. It's about a relationship with God. And as we go through the next couple of weeks, we're going to see that response. We're going to see how these men, when they entrusted their problem, when they entrusted it to their leadership, we'll see how that leadership responds and how they say, basically, that it's not about following laws. It's about a relationship with God. So let's pray. God, thank you so much that you show us again that it's not about traditions. It's not about following some rule that we've put in place. God, but sometimes us following certain traditions that we've grown up with, God, sometimes they ruin our relationships because we try to force those traditions and those rules on others. God, I pray that you will help us. Help us to know when we, God, are focusing on a rule, we're focusing on a tradition in our relationships with the ones that we love, God, instead of focusing on the relationship itself. God, please help us when we do the same with you, God. I know that I personally struggle with this with you, Lord. As I'll mark off, I read the Bible today, so I'm good with God. I prayed today, I'm good with God. Lord, please help us to know, please open our eyes to realize that that is not a relationship. If we just simply check off the box and say, oh, I've done that today. God, may we focus on you. May we always remember that traditions never save. And please help us, God, not to force our own traditions on others, God. We need you and we thank you. In Christ's name.